Go. Good afternoon. Welcome to Robots and Red Tape. I'm your host, Nick Shutt, here with my good friend, Chris Steele. Chris, if you could just go ahead and introduce yourself, your background, and tell us a little bit about where you are and kind of how you got here.
Sure, and thank you very much for having me on, Nick. I really appreciate it. Great series, and I'm really more than happy to contribute. I'm currently working with Alpha Six, a small startup. We graduated to a medium-sized business a little over a year ago, and we do primarily government contracting. So we work with some of the large named agencies that you would recognize, continually looking to expand. Interesting history. I only recently started working here, but I know the owner, I know the COO. I followed them for several years and really watched their progression, where they started off selling storage and hardware more as a VAR, really, and working their way up the stack, where they got into building out data lakes, building out these big data solutions, and then on top of it, patenting a cybersecurity algorithm that they developed. And they brought me in finally. They said, "Hey, look, we're ready to take it to the next level." And sort of, if you think of that pyramid, of hardware, software, storage, all those things that sort of culminate in AI and building out actual solutions. So, all of the, finishing out that component framework to really take them to the next level. My background has been all over the board. So I've been in and out of government for the last 25, 30 years. I've been doing AI for about the last eight. Seriously, I've always sort of played around with it, but with all the recent breakthroughs, I was really able to sit down, get through a bunch of courses, land a job at IQVIA where I was able to really excel and work with some extremely smart people, to understand the fundamentals. And so I'm happy to bring that knowledge here and apply it at Alpha Six, where we can create these better solutions for our government customers.
That's fantastic, man. Thank you, and really thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. Yeah, today we're talking about store now, decrypt later, and how the how AI is gonna first accelerate the timeline of that, and then allow bad actors to do that. To folks that aren't familiar, could you explain what store now, decrypt later is?
Sure. Store now, decrypt later is a strategy by which malicious actors will, in anticipation of this quantum breakthrough in standard encryption algorithm, in breaking that, the ability to store all of this encrypted data now that they don't have access to, but will once quantum computing has progressed far enough where it can crack our standard security algorithms like RSA.
Fantastic. And what organization should be most concerned about those tactics and and also how will AI enable quantum development to accelerate?
Okay, I'll break that down a little bit.
Hmm.
First of all, understanding what quantum computing is and what the implications are. Quantum computing is quite different from classical computing. It utilizes quantum bits, or what we call qubits, and this way of arranging them and entangling them allows them to perform these complex calculations at speeds just unattainable by current technology or classical technology ever. It was first, I think it was first conceived by Richard Feynman back in the 70s, but you'd have to fact check me on that. Um, one of the one of the first quantum algorithms to gain a lot of popularity was Shor's algorithm. So Shor, who is also very involved for people who follow cryptography, he's done a lot in that area. But one of the things that in, today, when we talk about encrypting stuff over our networks or storing it in the database, a lot of that really starts with public key cryptography. So being able to generate these large numbers that we can't, these integers that we can't factor very fast. Now with quantum computing, that gives us an ability. We believe, that we can then be able to crack those much faster. So you can take these in an exponentially faster way, as a matter of fact. So once we have that capability, we'll no longer be able to rely on these traditional algorithms, and they'll become susceptible. So anything that has been encrypted with those will be at risk of being able to be hacked by a quantum computer. Now, with that said, the the time frame for this, depending on who you ask, can range from uh, usually 8 to 10 years to maybe 30. But we don't know. It's a rapidly developing area of research, and we're not going to completely pin down a time frame anytime soon. So it could be 10 years, it could be 30, it could be 5. We
Hmm.
really don't know. And that puts at risk companies who have data that would be susceptible long range. So if you think about your credit card or your banks, I'm sending transactions over the wire. In 5 or 10 years, that's not going to really matter. I don't care. 5 to 10 years from now, I don't care if somebody were to be able to come back and decrypt all of my transactions for today. My passwords, things like that, they'll have changed
Hmm.
5 or 10 times over. But when you talk about longer term data, so my healthcare, a lot of the information I put on my security clearance forms, when you think about anything to do in the government around defense, intelligence, anything that needs to remain confidential over long periods of time is going to be susceptible. So I think first and foremost, the federal government, I think healthcare, just, any industry where you can't afford to have information hacked 5 to 10 years from
Hmm. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And I could see you're absolutely right that like banking and financial transaction information, not so much. But yeah, I mean, theoretically, I would assume the folks that are involved in things like cryptocurrency, where the all the keys are stored publicly or privately online, could be something that could be hacked as well. And then beyond that, I would assume that like financial data of inside corporations and financial data of companies would be something that also would be susceptible. Um,
Yeah, and the danger is, and I learned this firsthand at my last company, is a lot of these organizations are really relying, as they did historically, on the financial sector to sort of figure it out. What they don't realize is that the financial industry isn't as impacted as they are. Their time frames aren't the same as these other organizations.
mhm.
And so it's really important to get the message out that, hey, look, if you've got data that needs to remain confidential long term, you need to start acting today. You need to start understanding what that risk is and taking steps to mitigate it.
And how do you take that? I think it's post quantum cryptography is how do you secure data that is in the new paradigm when quantum becomes when quantum is able to crack these code crack this data.
Great question. So there's a number of different things you can start thinking about. One is the transition to quantum resistant cryptography.
Hmm.
So NIST and other organizations are developing quantum resistant encryption algorithms. There's a handful out there. They're looking to get some of these approved. It's an ongoing adventure. A couple years ago, they had a list of 4. Right away, two of those got compromised. They were scrapped. A couple others have popped up. Um, but there are things to think about. What will it take for my organization to transition? Data lifecycle management. So how do I manage my data lifecycle today? Where am I storing things, and for how long and why? We find that contextually, a lot of these organizations take the better safe than sorry approach. And
Mhm,
what they do is they store a lot of data a lot longer than they need to,
mhm,
which there's a lot of merit to doing that because you never know when something could happen. You may need to pull it out again. But in this particular case, that can work against you.
mhm,
So, with an eye towards, a probability that that data could become compromised, somebody could capture it, even in an encrypted state, and then, later be able to decrypt it. How do you want to better manage that? And how do you do that?
absolutely,
Um,
and how do
yeah,
companies
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go ahead. No, I was gonna ask, how do companies, obviously without, like, reverting to paper files, which I can't really hack outside of a human, right? How would I, who, I have multiple companies and I have data from, 7, 8 years ago that I don't really need. Is there a way I can securely store that, or should I delete it? What is that, and what are the implications of that potentially?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is really in terms of the management and how you move the data.
Mhm,
So I was interested to read that just recently Amazon stopped their snowmobile service. Basically, they had this semi trailer truck where you could load up all of your data, your hardware, data stored on that hardware, and ship it there, and then
mhm,
they would store it and upload it, etc. Very secure means of transporting data that you don't want somebody to intercept.
mhm,
So how am I today? Over what lines of communication am I transmitting my data? And do I need to rethink that? Do I need to think about things, a little more mundane, like physically moving servers and storage arrays? Does that make sense for me?
mhm,
Um, it just again, this is stuff to consider, to think about. Overall, you're just in general cybersecurity, good practices. What are my how am I conducting regular security audits to make sure that nobody's listening in on my network, that nobody's able to intercept that traffic? How do I know where that traffic's going? Are these networks locked down so that people don't have access to the encrypted portion of them?
mhm,
When we use the internet, there's always that possibility that there could be a man in the middle, right? How do we mitigate that? And that comes down to understanding the network architecture, understanding how the data is being moved and where the points of intercept may lie, and how I can take steps beyond traditional encryption to get that there more securely. So quantum resistant tunnel. So
mhm,
like a VPN using a quantum resistant algorithm might be a possibility. And then finally, just starting to think about incident response planning.
mhm,
What am I going to do at that point when that data does become compromised? What are my threats? What's my exposure going to be in terms of the overall impact on my company brand? If you're a government agency, on the people involved, military, civilians, etc. So those are steps you can just take today that don't require a ton of effort. Obviously, if you start to transition to quantum resistant cryptography, that's going to require more thought, but there's a lot to do with just sitting down and doing some upfront planning.
absolutely. And you mentioned transitioning to, post quantum cryptography a number of times. What should organizations think about when they start doing that first? And second, um, how can we even know that some of the methods that we're looking at transitioning to or putting in place, how, when you look at it from a capital investment perspective, how can we even know that they'll be effective if we don't know what quantum is going to be able to do and how that's going to work?
Yeah, that is a great question. So, I think the first place to start with is what's your exposure? What's the probability of compromise? And that depends on three things: longevity of the secrecy, the high valueness of the target, and complexity of the information infrastructure underlying it. So, what is my probability? That's going to drive my necessity to move towards quantum resistant algorithms. Next, looking at what's being done out in the industry today. So, as I had mentioned previously, NIST is taking steps to identify safe quantum resistant algorithms. It's testing these, hardening these. Pretty much you can go on and find out where each of these algorithms, sits, who's been testing them, who's been hacking against them, and try to determine. I think at the end of the day, the biggest thing is really building a flexible encryption infrastructure so that I can easily swap in and out algorithms.
Mhm,
And part of that, which is the biggest problem, so this I make an analogy to the Y2K problem, right? What was the problem? The problem was back in the 70s, people had been using two digits for the year instead of four, right? So that at the turn of the century, we're going to have a big problem. Pretty easy fix. If you've got the code, if you know where to go, you just go in and replace that with four digits.
mhm,
Well understood problem. And a lot of this is similar. That's the biggest problem isn't that we need to develop we have a good start on these quantum resistant algorithms.
mhm,
It's like the Y2K problem and like the log4j problem 6 or 7 years ago, right? Where you know the solution, it's fairly easy. The problem is identifying all the places where it's being used. So if I were to walk into a large government agency or a large corporation today and I said, hey, really easy. I've got a simple replacement. Just tell me where all the places you're using RSA or VES or AES, those algorithms are, and I can go in and replace them in a couple minutes. Well, it would probably take them about a year to two, if not more, just to get me that list.
mhm,
And that's where the real problem is. And that's where we need to start today is that risk assessment and prioritizing. Where are the areas I really need to lock this down? And now understanding where am I using encryption in those areas? There's going to be a ton of different places. Nobody's going to be certain. If they think they're certain, they're probably wrong. And
mhm,
we've learned that a couple times over. It's not impossible, but it's going to take some time. And that's why I stress to people who will listen to start doing that now. Start identifying all the areas where you're reliant on these encryption algorithms, get those documented, and then you can start thinking about how do you best replace them. And when you go to replace them, again, being flexible in how you do it to make sure you can swap in and out algorithms so that if tomorrow one of these new quantum resistant algorithms is broken, you'll have a fallback to rely on.
mhm. That makes a lot of sense. So we need to not only, so would something like the government rolling out I think CMMC compliance for all contractors, is that a step in the right direction of contractors understanding where they're using security and storing information?
Yeah, absolutely. training is a huge part of it. Training at the management level to understand what the risk is, to understand what the options are, training at the technical layer to understand where the encryption algorithms are being used, how to swap them out, how to better manage keys, and then at the operational level to understand how do we update our processes. So, within the DevOps lifecycle, what needs to change? How, what are the impacts to our current processes in order to incorporate these new algorithms and this new way of doing things. So one of the things I didn't talk about, we talked about a lot about the algorithms, but there's also another part, the quantum key distribution, QKD. So there's now quantum allows us, it provides us with, I won't attempt to explain it because I'd need an hour to do so just on its own, but a way to securely distribute keys such that nobody can intercept them without screwing it up in the process. So I can take and I can transmit the key. If somebody tries to intercept it, they'll break the key, and then it'll be no good. So it'll be understood that yes, this was not, it did not transmit properly, and that I think, especially in defense, they're looking at that very closely, and I think that needs to propagate beyond defense into these other industries as well.
Absolutely. So what are, I would, and as a layman looking at this, I would assume that any, quantum resistant cryptography would obviously be resistant to any technology that we have existing now. um to as far as hacking and looking to get into these organizations, what's the barrier, the holdup of organizations starting to move this way now? And if you'd say looked at the 500 biggest companies in the world, how many of them do you think are thinking about this and looking at this as a serious threat, and really looking to start implementing security measures against it?
From what I've seen, it's a very small percentage, and I think there's a couple reasons. One, nobody's really talking about it. I think most people, they just have it in their mind that this technology is too far off to be concerned with today. So as a society, we're now at the point where we tend to think on a quarter by quarter basis, right?
Mhm.
There doesn't typically, we're just not that concerned with anything, a year or more out. And like with electric cars, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen fast.
Mhm.
One day you wake up thinking, there's no way everybody's going to be driving an electric car. That's just not going to happen in my lifetime. And the next day, they're all over our streets.
Mhm.
Where I live, you can't drive to the market without passing three Teslas.
Mhm.
And that's what's going to happen with this. There's going to be some breakthroughs, and then suddenly it's going to be a problem. But the bigger problem is that, again, I can't think of a really good analogy where we had this problem that just there, it's just so unanticipated, so hard to see. We knew in the 80s, in the late 80s, we knew the Y2K problem was going to be a problem. We had the 90s, the mid 90s. Everybody started focusing on it. You remember the movie Office Space? We're making movies about it.
Love that movie.
Yeah, it was highly anticipated. And I think this is one of those things that's just going unanticipated.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of companies, corporations, and even agencies are really relying on somebody else to sort of figure it out. They think that we can get a fix in place just in time. But the problem is that's not the case. We've got this radically different situation where people with enough foresight are going to go out and they're going to harvest this encrypted data today. I can envision, I mean, this is, I think, is more sci-fi than what I really rely on, but I could envision in 10 years from now a marketplace, a black market for encrypted data where people sell it.
Yeah.
So we've got hackers that come in today and encrypt your data and then, sell it back to you, sell you the decryption key, right?
Mhm.
Why would they not go out, grab all that data, store it somewhere, and then sell it to whatever actor comes along that has that capability and is willing to pay for it?
Mhm. I agree. I agree with you 100%, and I don't think it's that far off. I don't think it's that far-fetched, and I think that based on and correct me if I'm wrong here, Chris, based on the barrier to entry to getting sustainable, ability to crack this encryption with quantum, it's primarily going to be nation states, and I would assume it's going to be larger nation states that are gonna have the ability to do this sooner rather than later. I would assume that like the just like we are here, I would assume the Chinese are putting a bunch of money into this and probably India and a few other a few like a bunch of other countries as well.
Yeah, and I think what's going to happen first is you are going to have these large nation state players doing it without anybody knowing. They're not going to advertise it. They're not going to conferences to talk about it. They're just going to develop that technology and use it. And I think it'll be a couple years after that, which it starts to get out, and other more public organizations are doing it, other bad characters, somebody will get caught, it will make the news, people will start talking, and then we'll start to realize the scope of the problem.
Mhm. Yeah. No, I agree with you, and to the point you made earlier about information that would be available, like, would be a very, very interesting to I agree that I don't really think that so concerned about somebody getting a hold of the things that I spent money on 5 years ago. But I think that many nation states would be very interested in who was an intel asset for other countries 5 years ago or 10 years ago or 2 decades ago. And I think that that would be something that would drive a lot of this desire to, crack it. Because I would assume they have a lot of I would assume that a lot of the data is already out there, already has been downloaded, especially when you look at things like, how many times, for instance, to the point you made earlier about clearance forms, how many times clearance information has been, taken by foreign countries.
Right? Yeah, mine's all been compromised.
Mhm.
Have you ever watched that program Storage Wars?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So this, don't you see that being a distinct possibility where just like that, people have these big bundles of encrypted data that even they don't know what's inside of, that
Mhm,
they go out and sell. There's a little bit of context. Maybe you get a little peek into that data. Maybe, some small amount of it is given to you so you understand what the data consists of, and then you go out and sell it to the highest bidder,
mhm,
right? That it's to me that's more or less inevitable. I mean, I see this coming. I don't think there's really, just with all the progress we keep making, and it seems like it's monthly at this point with the quantum computing, that we're just about there, and that
mhm,
there are going to be individuals with the foresight to understand what the implication is and start doing these things, start collecting that data in preparation for it.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, you can already go on the dark web and buy information about bundles of information about people. They've been doing, they've been selling credit card information online for over 20 years now, right? Assume since the 90s, probably 30. I guess that was 30 years ago now. It's just it seems to be the next logical step, especially when you look at, how things are like it's not like there's going to be less internet 20 years from now or less stuff online or less wires. It's all everything's gonna or more wires. I mean, everything's gonna be more wireless. It's gonna be more interconnected. And I think that, you're absolutely right that you're gonna end up seeing people selling a lot of this. But what do you
And we
think?
need we
Go
need
ahead.
we need our laws and regulations to catch up with it. Today, is selling a bunch of encrypted data illegal? I mean, if I can't get access to it and you can't, is there any harm in that if I went out and just started sniffing, within AWS or somewhere and
Mhm.
selling that data? What are the legal implications? We're behind. We need to start thinking of those things. We need to start moving that direction where we define what's legal, what's not, and what we're going to do about it. So how do we deal with, we have a better understanding and a better grip on how to deal with traditional hackers today than
Mhm.
we did 10, 20 years ago. But we still need to start building out national policies on what we're going to allow our allies and those working against us to be able to do. Do we
Mhm.
want a nation state that's just capturing all of our encrypted traffic? Today, I don't think we'd do anything if we did. If we found out that somebody was just storing all this data, I don't think there's really any ramification to that. Nobody's thinking far enough ahead that this is going to be a problem in the
Mhm.
future.
Right. And do you think that as over the last 10 years, cloud computing has gotten so much more popular, and now we're essentially aggregating all the data in places. And I'm sure that, places like the Intel community are building out, and DoD and other agencies are building out air gapped clouds and things like that. What do you think, first, what do you think the over reliance on cloud service providers could do to us? Second, what do you think some of the implications of that are, and having all of that information localized are? And third, have you seen or heard of, many of these cloud storage providers being pioneers in this, or do you think that they're going to be lagging behind and caught with their pants down, so to speak?
So yeah, that's a great question. I think it's very vendor specific, but in general, I've actually seen a lot more attention paid by the cloud vendors. I think that they are actively looking at this threat and doing things to mitigate it. Historically, we worried about the security of these large cloud vendors, only to find that typically they do security a lot better than the rest of us.
Mhm.
So I think it really depends. It's something everybody has to sit down and assess. And I think that starts with a conversation with your cloud vendor to talk with the AWSs, the Azures, the Googles of the world and say, look, this is my data. This is what I'm concerned about. What are you going to do to protect it?
Mhm.
When are you going to have that in place? what what types of protections are you going to guarantee moving forward, and what are my alternatives? um, I myself would feel a lot better if I had somebody like Amazon taking care of all this for me,
Mhm.
right? If I had all of my did everything in their cloud and they were going to manage all that, that would be a lot better than me trying to do all of that on prem. Because
Mhm.
again, they do a much better job of managing data and processes, DevOps, everything. They're much more reliable. They're much more process oriented than most of the rest of us.
Yeah, and they have access to better talent, frankly, as well. And a lot of people that I've spoken with, in the AI space and in the cyberspace as well, have been having trouble, especially in the government, have been having trouble retaining a lot of the high quality talent that they have, because people like Amazon come in and offer them 4 times or 5 times the max of what the government can pay them, right? And when you think about that kind of talent, all aggregating in one place, I, like you, would be much more comfortable with somebody like that holding all of it, because they're aggregating so much, they're gonna have more resources, allocate more resources to it, have better people working on it, and hopefully put more thought into it.
Right. Yeah, and as a business owner, it gives me a throat to choke. If
Mhm.
something goes wrong, I can go to them, right? If I am trying to do all of this myself on prem, and a lot of customers are going to have to, you have to really start thinking about who to put in charge of this, and what, the reporting responsibilities are, and what your explanation is going to be to your shareholders, your partners, et cetera, if something is to be compromised.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And but some one of the things is I run a small healthcare company as well, and I don't we've never had paper files, right? Everything has been all electronic, and we contract not directly with somebody like an Amazon or a Microsoft to do this. We contract with an EHR who contracts with one of the providers out there, and it'd just be interesting to see kind of how that flows. If my patient's data gets stolen, right, and decrypted later on, am I liable? Is the cloud provider liable? Is the EHR liable? How does all that work? How do the contracts flow? Is just a fascinating business question, right?
Right? Yeah.
And then in addition to that, so from a contingency planning perspective, what should organizations have in place as this kind of starts moving forward? I know you mentioned somewhere between 10 and 30 years with the recent development and breakthrough in AI. I mean, is there, how quickly could that accelerate things overall?
I think I think one, start looking at your messaging around the day that that data does become compromised, and what are the things that you want to be able to say that you did to prevent it. I think i think in this day and age, you're not going to get away with pleading ignorance.
Hmm.
The public is really, we're becoming immune to that. It made sense. We jumped on technology 20 years ago because we enjoyed the the reduction in effort, all the convenience that it brought with us, to risk some of the security. There were a lot of promises made, and some of those broken, and we let a lot of companies slide, but that's no longer the case. I think if you try to plead ignorance, you're going to lose your job. So I think it starts up front with looking for funding to start putting together some of these assessments, to start prioritizing these things, and to come up with an action plan. Here's the things we want to do. Take that to the shareholders, and whoever else, and try and get those things approved, right? There will be a budget, and then you start weighing the risk with the investment. So once I've done that, now there's a sense of transparency. Now we understand that as a CISO, a CEO, the COO, as a leadership team, we understand this threat and we're taking steps to prevent it. And you may not take enough, but if you're transparent, if you start thinking about it, then that's going to go a lot farther with saying, hey, we were just waiting for the financial industry to take care of it. They never did anything.
Right. Absolutely. 100%. That's as we get ready to close here, Chris, is there anything else that you think that, any other points, anything else you'd like to say or anything else that, folks should be thinking about as we look at this brave new world that we're moving towards?
Ah, that's a good question. I think it just starts with an interest. I hope that the people listening are intrigued enough to go out and start doing a little bit of research. Just doing a bit of searching. Go ask ChatGPT. Describe to them your organization and what you're doing and what it thinks the risks are, and what options are available. um, it's something that I think everybody should consider. I don't think anybody at this point needs to be staying up late at night. Maybe if I was in the Intel community, I might be doing that.
Hmm.
A lot of other organizations, you have a little bit of time, but again, we don't know who's out there collecting the data right now. And all the data they're collecting, it's going to be there forever, right? Data that's on the internet's there forever, and someday it will be compromised. And I think another thing to really consider too is this whole aspect beyond company data around the ability to grab social media data.
Mhm.
So all of my private chats, even you think about like Snapchat, right, where it's gone. Well, actually, maybe it's not. Maybe somebody intercepted it on the way. It was encrypted, but someday they may be able to decrypt that. And because I've been looking at this, I tend to think about it, and I'm careful with what I post because I know that there is a small chance that at some point somebody could decrypt this and come back. And is it something that I could be blackmailed with? Um, Unfortunately, my life is fairly boring. Nobody's going to blackmail me with anything,
It's good
other than
news.
the many times I've gone off my diet. But
Right. Mhm. Yeah, absolutely.
there are people. There are people in high places that need to consider that they need to be careful with their information and not to completely rely on today's encryption because tomorrow it could be cracked. And in a lot of cases, on the day-to-day stuff, again, in 5 years, most of these conversations won't matter. What I said about my neighbor or my coworker, they're probably not going to care in 5 years. But um, other things, there could be things that I wouldn't want ever found out.
Mhm.
And so, be really cautious about how you communicate that data, where it's stored, who's storing it, and how it could eventually be compromised.
I would assume that applies to messaging apps like, WhatsApp and others that are end-to-end encrypted. Everything could be being stored somewhere and will be broken one day because none of this encryption is gonna last very much longer.
Right, right. Yeah, and think about who are the companies that own these messaging apps? Where is that data today? I
Mhm,
mean, I'll just throw out Snapchat. My kids use it all the time.
mhm.
How do we know that that data isn't sitting on a server somewhere? Yeah, my message is gone from the app. Is it gone completely? Is it irrecoverable?
Yep.
And was it well enough protected that somebody didn't intercept it in flight? So again, it was encrypted. They couldn't see it. But if they just grab it, throw it on a hard drive, and come back in 10 years, they may be able to go through and now look at all of my messages and what could they piece together that I would pay to have them not do that.
Absolutely. I just read, and I forget where it was, but I just read that as part of Google specifically, as part of some of their settlements, agrees to delete all of the incognito searches that you have ever had and all the stuff that they have on you around that. I mean, and again, that's just something that people assume that just because it doesn't show up in your local history, that it's just gone and it's not there. It's still there. Google has all of it, and I would assume that they'd be a prime target of something like this. Them or a Facebook or any of these large organizations out there that aggregate massive, massive amounts of data.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. My kids, whenever I talk to them about internet security, they'll bring up the fact that they use a VPN, et cetera. And as I've told them, a VPN is just another encrypted tunnel. It doesn't provide any additional security in this matter. You're using a VPN, great, but at the end of the day, you're actually, in cases, probably exposing yourself more by including more hops where that encrypted traffic could get sniffed and stored.
Mhm. Interesting. Well, man, I really appreciate it, Chris. Thank you so much for taking the time and the conversation. I really enjoyed our chat. Always enjoy our chats, and I enjoy the candor, man. Thank you.
Well, great. Thank you, Nick. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you, my friend.